comments about, did David Dodson cremate Summer for Dawn and Candace? So that's what this video is going to be about today. I think I know where David Dodson did work.
What if the answer to Summer Wells' disappearance has been hiding in plain sight? Not in the woods, not in the holler, but in the chilling words of her own father. She'll never be found. What if those words weren't despair, but a roadmap? This investigation pulls apart the details that mainstream reports have buried. The urn necklaces suddenly worn by the family, then abandoned when people started asking questions. A crematorium just 5 miles from the Wells home. A funeral worker called to Ben Hill the very night Summer vanished. And a cemetery burial that took place 3 days later. These aren't coincidences. They are puzzle pieces. Today, we assemble them. And when they lock together, they may reveal what really happened to Summer Wells. It is the sentence that still haunts this case, a phrase more chilling than the silence of the Tennessee holler, where 5-year-old Summer Wells vanished. She'll never be found. Spoken by her father, Don Wells, it carried the weight of finality. Not, I don't think she'll be found. Not, it might be hard to find her. He chose the one word that closes every door. Never. That single word reshaped the way thousands of people viewed the disappearance. It sounded less like the hope of a grieving parent and more like a verdict already written. In true crime investigations, language can be as revealing as DNA. Forensic linguists and seasoned detectives know that tense, tone, and certainty often betray more than the speaker intends. Doan's words were spoken in the future tense, but with absolute certainty. Most parents in the first days of a missing child case cling desperately to hope, repeating pleas like, "Bring her home," or "Would just want her safe." They live on a fragile thread of possibility. Dawn's statement, however, offered none. It was not a plea. It was a guarantee that the search would fail. And in the world of unsolved crime, guarantees are dangerous. Viewers who have followed this case from the start remember that line vividly. Comments flood online discussions even years later. Dawn did say she'd never be found. He said it long ago. These are not casual recollections. They are refrains, repeated like evidence in a trial of public opinion. In the absence of clear forensic proof, the community has clung to words, and Dawn's words are the sharpest blade. Once spoken, they became impossible to retract. They turned into what investigators sometimes call a hypothesis generator, the phrase around which people build entire theories, and theories they built. If Dawn himself said, "Never," then there must be a reason, something irreversible. Maybe Summer was burned, her remains reduced to ash. Maybe she was buried so deeply, or in such a protected space, that no cadaver dog or radar could reach her. Maybe she was handed off into a network that would make her disappear beyond recovery. Each possibility was tested against that single word, as if Dawn had left behind a riddle, and the answer would fit perfectly once found. The father's own language became the lens through which every coincidence was magnified into suspicion. This phenomenon is not new. In case after case, guilty parties have betrayed themselves not through fingerprints but through words. Chris Watts, who murdered his wife and children, slipped into past tense when describing his missing daughters before their bodies were discovered. Scott Peterson's responses about his pregnant wife Lassie were detached, clinical, and oddly predictive of death. Casey Anthony's statements about her daughter Kaylee contained inconsistencies that experts later cited as red flags. Language is slippery. When grief is real, words stumble, crack, or plead. When something darker lies beneath, they sometimes reveal too much certainty. Dawn Wells, she'll never be found, fell squarely into that pattern. But to be fair, language can also mislead. There are possible innocent interpretations. Perhaps Dawn was exhausted, overwhelmed by the dense terrain, convinced no search could succeed. Perhaps he was lashing out defensively, shutting down critics who accused him by making a harsh, hopeless claim. Perhaps it was despair, not knowledge. Even so, the phrasing remains abnormal. Most fathers in that position reach for hope even when hope is thin. Dawn reached for finality, and finality is what the public heard. The true impact of his statement lies not just in the words themselves, but in the ripple effect they caused. From that moment, the community was primed to see every new piece of information through the prism of never. A crematorium 5 miles from the Wells home. That must explain why she'll never be found. The family suddenly wearing urn necklaces. That fits perfectly with never. A burial at a local cemetery 3 days after she vanished. Again, it dovetails with the prediction. The line didn't just describe the case, it rewrote its framework. Once people believed the father had declared her forever gone, they scarred for evidence to justify that prophecy. And yet, to assess its true meaning, investigators would need more than echoes on the internet. They would need the original recording, the precise moment, the exact audience. Was it said in an interview on camera, in a phone call to a friend, in a hushed comment overheard? Who was present? Did anyone challenge him in the moment? Context is everything. Without it, the phrase floats in a void, powerful but ambiguous, potent but unverifiable. For all its weight, it is still just a sentence, and sentences alone rarely close cases. Still, in the court of public opinion, words matter. They matter more when hard evidence is scarce. Doan's statement has become one of the few touchstones in a mystery thick with rumor and contradiction. It hangs over every theory, quoted in countless videos, dissected in endless comment threads, held up as proof that the father knew more than he admitted. Whether despair or confession, it has become part of the permanent record of the Summer Wells case. Every mystery needs its cast of characters, and in the Summer Wells case one name appears again and again in whispers: David Dodson, known to some as the flute guy. From church, to others as the man Candace Wells called on the night Summer disappeared, Dodson is not family, not a neighbor, but something more ambiguous. His background, his presence, and his connections have made him one of the most polarizing figures in the entire case. Some see him as a friend who tried to help. Others see him as the ultimate insider, a man with access to the one industry that could make a body vanish forever: the funeral trade. Dodson's link to the Wells family began through the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was through this religious community that he became acquainted with Dawn and Candace, and by extension with Summer. He played music, he socialized, he was visible. In small towns, church networks are powerful. They provide trust, credibility, and entry into family circles. In this case, that network positioned Dodson close enough to the Wells family that his presence at Ben Hill Road on the most critical night in their lives did not seem extraordinary at first. Only later, when pieces were revisited, did his proximity begin to look unsettling. The second piece of the puzzle is his work history. Dodson is believed to have worked at East Lawn Funeral Home in Kingsport. This is not rumor. Multiple sources familiar with the area confirmed his employment. East Lawn itself does not have a crematory on site. Bodies must be transported elsewhere, but that detail matters less than the fact that Dodson was part of the professional circle. Funeral homes, crematoriums, cemeteries, they operate in tight coordination, with employees moving across institutions, sharing vendors, and knowing one another by name. An insider in that network knows who to call, how to arrange, what forms are expected, and where loopholes may exist. Even if he never touched a cremation machine himself, Dodson's position could have given him access to knowledge and contacts unavailable to outsiders. It is precisely that insider status that captured the imagination of online sleuths. Commenters pointed out that Dodson had been fired before Summer's disappearance, as if the loss of his position might have left him disgruntled, vulnerable, or even desperate. One retired nurse wrote, "Funeral professionals usually know other funeral professionals wherever they live, and they are connected. Why was Dodson called to Ben Hill the very night Summer went missing?" To her, this was not coincidence, it was connection. The suspicion was simple: if anyone could help the Wells dispose of evidence without leaving a trace, it would be someone like Dodson. Of course, suspicion is not proof. To this day, there is no official record made public confirming the circumstances of his departure from East Lawn. Was he truly fired? Did he leave voluntarily? Was it before or after Summer disappeared? These details matter because narratives form in the vacuum left by missing facts. In small-town gossip and the echo chambers of YouTube, a termination without paperwork becomes a stain that never washes away. The lack of documentation is itself interpreted as suspicious. The timeline that keeps investigators and armchair detectives circling Dodson is simple. On June 15, 2021, Summer disappears. That very night, Dodson is reportedly called to Ben Hill Road. Why him? If Candace needed help, why not family? Why not a closer neighbor? His presence at that specific hour turned what might have been a footnote into a focal point. If the family needed emotional support, calling a church friend makes sense. If they needed something else, advice, cover, disposal, then calling a man tied to funeral work suddenly looks like premeditation. So what were his potential motives? 3 possibilities arise in discussion. First, protection. Perhaps he felt loyalty to the Wells, wanting to shield them from law enforcement scrutiny, especially if Summer's disappearance was the result of an accident. Second, darker impulses. There are suggestions, whispered more than proven, that his involvement might have been tied to unhealthy fixations, the same kind of sick satisfaction, one commenter theorized. Third, profit. In a scenario where illicit services are rendered, money could always be an incentive. None of these have been substantiated. They remain, for now, motivations projected onto Dodson by outsiders trying to make sense of his role. The counter-argument is worth stating clearly. Funeral work is not a crime. Thousands of people hold those jobs with integrity. Being present the night of a tragedy does not make one complicit. Many times, people with professional experience are called in crisis simply because they know how to handle stress, paperwork, or logistics. Without concrete proof of wrongdoing, Dodson's entire reputation risks being defined by rumor. What looks incriminating to the internet may, in reality, be a tragic coincidence, and yet, his case remains a black box. To assess his role, investigators would need to confirm key details. Employment records at East Lawn, start date, end date, reason for departure. Call logs from Candace's phone that night, who contacted Dodson, at what time, for what reason. Witnesses who saw him arrive or leave the Wells property. These are the kinds of tangible data points that transform speculation into evidence. Without them, the suspicions remain smoke, but without them, the smoke never clears either. If an interviewer were to sit across from Dodson, the questions would be direct and unrelenting. What time did you arrive at Ben Hill? Who called you? What exactly did you do once you were there? Which funeral home employed you that week? Did they have a crematory? Do you still know staff who work in cremation facilities? These are not accusations, they are the basic facts the public has never been able to nail down. Whether guilty or innocent, whether scapegoat or accomplice, his name has become part of the case file written in the court of public opinion. The fact that Candace called him that night remains a puzzle piece. No one has managed to fit. And until hard evidence proves otherwise, people will continue to ask why. Out of everyone in Hawkins County, it was David Dodson who stood at Ben Hill Road on the night Summer Wells disappeared. In the sea of speculation that surrounds the Summer Wells case, one image stood out and spread like wildfire across forums, Facebook groups, and YouTube comment sections. The Wells family wearing small urn-shaped necklaces in the weeks after Summer's disappearance. The sight was jarring. A child had just gone missing, supposedly still alive somewhere. Yet here were family members carrying jewelry commonly used to hold ashes. To some, it was an innocent keepsake, a token of mourning culture in America. To others, it was the most damning clue yet, a silent admission that Summer was dead, reduced to dust, and hidden in plain sight. Viewers began cataloging screenshots and photos. Who wore them? Candace, certainly, in several images circulated in the early months. Don was seen with one at least once. Even other relatives appeared with matching pieces, as if they had coordinated. The timing only sharpened suspicion. These necklaces appeared quickly after the disappearance, then, as attention grew, quietly vanished. Observers noted that once people online began questioning, the Wells family stopped wearing them publicly. In the world of true crime, where symbols speak louder than words, that pattern was fuel for conspiracy. The urn necklace is not an obscure object. They are marketed widely, available in funeral homes and online stores, often sold with the tagline, "Keep your loved one close to your heart." They can contain ashes, strands of hair, dried flowers, or even a pinch of soil from a burial site. For grieving parents, spouses, or children, they provide a tangible way to carry loss daily. In most contexts, they are tender rather than suspicious. But when worn by a family whose daughter is officially still missing, the meaning shifts dramatically. Commenters were blunt. One wrote, "Remember those necklaces the Wells had on? They stopped wearing them when people started noticing." Another declared, "Too many coincidences which aren't coincidences." The pattern became a narrative. The Wells wore the necklaces when they thought no one would question them, then abandoned them as soon as scrutiny arrived. In the eyes of many, that looked like guilt peeking through, then retreating back into secrecy. Could those necklaces truly contain ashes? Technically, yes. The cavities in such jewelry are small, but they can hold a symbolic pinch of cremated remains. Science, however, complicates the matter. As noted in funeral industry discussions and echoed in investigative commentary, cremation remains are rarely pure. About 10 to 15% of ashes are typically mixed with traces from other bodies, and fragments of one person can remain in the machinery, blending into the next cremation. This makes the idea of testing urn jewelry for definitive DNA complex. Still, partial analysis is possible. Forensic labs have occasionally extracted mitochondrial DNA from cremated fragments, though success rates vary depending on burn temperature and preservation. Theoretically, if investigators obtained one of the necklaces and analyzed its contents, they might find DNA fragments sufficient to indicate human origin, or rule it out entirely. That possibility lingers like a ghost. What if the necklaces could answer the case once and for all? It raises the uncomfortable reality that law enforcement has never, to public knowledge, demanded those items for examination. Were they dismissed as irrelevant? Were they never seized because no warrant justified it? Or were they quietly tested and results sealed away? For the public, absence of clarity means suspicion thrives. Of course, there are counterarguments. Urn necklaces are marketed not only for ashes but also as memory keepsakes. They can hold perfume, tiny notes, sand from a beach, or even colored beads. It is entirely possible the Wells purchased them as a show of unity, a physical emblem of remembrance, while still believing Summer was alive. Families grieve differently. Symbols of mourning sometimes arrive before official confirmation. In this reading, the necklaces are not evidence but misinterpreted grief. They may never have contained ashes at all. But suspicion remains stubborn because of timing. Why appear so soon? Why vanish so suddenly? In criminal psychology, abrupt behavioral changes, acquiring new symbols, then discarding them, are often read as signs of concealment. If innocent, why not continue wearing them openly, explaining they were symbolic? The retreat under scrutiny is what keeps suspicion alive. Investigators looking seriously at this angle would need concrete steps. First, secure the original photographs with metadata intact, establishing when and where the necklaces were worn. Second, request the physical jewelry itself for forensic testing, ideally with voluntary cooperation from the family. Third, determine the purchase source, receipts, online orders, local funeral homes, to see if they were marketed as ash urns or as generic lockets. Fourth, if ashes are inside, conduct DNA analysis to confirm whether they are human, and if so, whether any markers match Summer's maternal line. These steps could transform speculation into evidence, either to support or dismiss the public's darkest suspicions. If one were interviewing Dawn or Candace directly, the questions would cut sharp. Where did you buy those necklaces? Who suggested them? What did you place inside? Why did you stop wearing them? Each answer would either normalize the objects or further deepen the cloud around them. Silence, as always, would speak volumes. In the absence of hard forensic testing, the necklaces remain what they have always been, objects onto which the public projects its fears and suspicions. They may be meaningless trinkets, or they may be the most brazen clue of all. What cannot be denied is their impact. They altered the narrative of the case, transformed jewelry into evidence in the minds of thousands, and left behind one of the most visually potent controversies in the disappearance of Summer Wells. Whether those urns hold ashes, hair, perfume, or nothing at all, they have become symbols of grief, of guilt, of secrecy, and until someone opens them under the light of a forensic lab, they will remain symbols that haunt this mystery. To understand why the theory of a secret cremation grips the public imagination, one has to step inside the world of cremation itself, a world not of folklore or rumor, but of paperwork, regulations, and heat so intense it reduces bone to dust. At its core, the process is designed to be airtight, not only literally but legally. Every human body destined for cremation must pass through a paper trail, a death certificate signed by a physician or coroner, an authorization form from the legal next of kin, a cremation permit issued by the state, and a chain of custody that tracks the body from the funeral home to the retort. Each signature is meant to be a lock on a door. Only when all the locks align does the furnace ignite. The system is not only bureaucratic, it is recorded. Crematoriums keep logs of every operation, the date and time a body is placed, the temperature cycles, the operator on duty, the identification tag that follows the remains through the process. Invoices are issued, receipts signed, cremation numbers assigned. The body, in theory, never disappears into the flames without leaving behind a trail of ink. Even the ashes are returned in containers labeled with identification codes, with paperwork that must match state inspection. Yet where there are locks, there are always keys that can be copied or forged. That is where suspicion thrives. Online commenters have pointed to one weak point again and again. Paperwork can be forged. If a physician is complicit, or if a form is fabricated, a body might slide into the system under a false name. If a funeral director mislabels, or if a crematory operator turns a blind eye, the official log may look legitimate, even as the reality diverges. In most cases, the risks are too great. A single discovery could shut down a business and put its operators in prison. But the mere possibility is enough to fuel theories. Consider the evidence chain. Every transfer from home or hospital to funeral home, from funeral home to crematory, requires documentation. A missing bill of lading, a forged signature, a cremation that occurs without a corresponding death certificate would be glaring to a state inspector. But what if the oversight is never performed? What if the paperwork appears ordinary, and no one cross-checks it against a living, breathing person? In the shadow gaps of bureaucracy, that is where illicit acts could, at least in theory, occur. There are also darker workarounds whispered in the industry. One is the use of pet crematoriums. These facilities, meant for cats, dogs, and livestock, are not always regulated as tightly as human operations. They run similar furnaces, often capable of handling large carcasses, and in some regions they may burn multiple animals together, returning representative ashes to owners. Insert a human body into that process, and the lines blur. No death certificate required, no state inspector expected. It is not legal, but it is feasible. Another possibility is the ceramic kiln. Studios and industrial kilns reach temperatures higher than crematory furnaces. They are designed to fire clay, glaze pottery, harden tiles. Yet in their raw function, heat and containment, they could accomplish the same as a crematorium. No paperwork, no logs, no receipts, only the silence of ash left behind. Of course, the remains would not be properly processed. Large bone fragments would persist, and the cleanup would be incriminating. But as a method of destruction, it exists in the public imagination because of its brutal simplicity, a hot chamber and time. Then there is the so-called double burn. A licensed cremation occurs for a legitimate decedent, with all paperwork intact. A second body is placed in the chamber without being logged. The legitimate ashes are returned to the family, while the illicit remains mingle, unclaimed, indistinguishable, swept out in the cleaning cycle. Funeral insiders admit it would be extraordinarily risky. The space is confined. The weight discrepancies hard to explain, the leftover fragments potentially noticed. But to theorists, it is a loophole too tempting to ignore. Skeptics, of course, push back. The industry is heavily audited. State inspectors conduct surprise visits, reviewing logs, cross-checking numbers. Operators face not only prison, but permanent loss of license, the end of their careers. Why would anyone risk a steady livelihood for a single cover-up? The answer, critics argue, is that they wouldn't. The system is simply too rigid. Still, if investigators wanted to test the validity of the theory, the evidence to seek is clear. First, the crematorium logs, every entry, every cycle on the date in question. Second, bills of lading, the documents that track which bodies were transferred where. Third, witness testimony from staff. Did anyone see an extra transfer, an unexplained addition? Fourth, surveillance footage. Many facilities maintain security cameras in loading bays and retort rooms. If a body were introduced without paperwork, the camera would know even if the logbook did not. These are not abstract questions. They are the kinds of queries investigators would have to put directly to operators. Who received the body that day? Is there a log entry? Did you ever process a cremation without paperwork? Was there ever pressure from a funeral home to bend the rules? The answers would matter, because suspicion is not enough. It is the tangible clash between paperwork and reality that cracks open cases. In the end, the legal furnace is meant to be an impenetrable vault. Bodies go in, ashes come out, and the paper trail ties every step together. But as with all systems built by humans, cracks exist, not proven, but imagined, theorized, feared. In the Wells case, those cracks have become the stage on which theories perform. Whether or not they were ever exploited, they remain the dark possibilities. The doors behind the furnace that few dare to open, but that the public cannot stop staring at. Every crime has a geography, and in the case of Summer Wells, that geography stretches from the chaotic clutter of Ben Hill Road to the highways that connect Fall Branch and on toward Jonesboro, where Don Wells worked construction. Investigators often say opportunity is hidden in the spaces between home and work, in the drive that happens every day, in the quiet minutes where routine provides cover. The theory that Summer was moved, hidden, or even disposed of along that corridor has haunted this case because of how ordinary and how plausible it sounds. Start with the map. Ben Hill Road is a winding, narrow track, shaded by woods, dotted with trailers and outbuildings, leading eventually to main roads that open toward Highway 81. From there, the drive to Jonesboro is straightforward. Nestled just off that road is Fall Branch, and within Fall Branch, the presence of facilities, including a crematorium mentioned in early speculation, adds weight to suspicion. The path is only about 5 miles from the Wells home to Fall Branch, then another short drive to the larger artery heading into Jonesboro. For someone with reason to move evidence quickly, it is the perfect combination: secluded exit, quick access to highways, and multiple opportunities to stop along the way. Community sleuths have obsessed over the potential blind spots on that route. Gas stations with patchy cameras, Dollar General stores with surveillance that records over itself every 24 hours, small restaurants like Pizza Plus where customers stream in and out without noticing a single vehicle. Each location offers what investigators call points of concealment, moments where a driver can pause, transfer, or hand off without drawing attention. If Summer was moved by vehicle, the question becomes, where along that corridor could it have happened? The timing matters. To load a small child into a vehicle, even in panic, might take 1 to 2 minutes. To drive 5 miles on rural roads, 7 to 10 minutes. To pull into a gas station, meet another car, transfer quickly, another 2 to 3 minutes. In total, less than 15 minutes could carry a child from her home into an entirely different environment. That window is slim, but not impossible. It becomes more feasible when layered against Doan's work routine. He drove that way daily. No one would blink to see his vehicle on that road. Familiarity is its own disguise. Commenters picked up on this logic. One wrote about mapping Lemongrass Drive, noting how side roads offered cover to pull over unseen. Another pointed to the Meadows, an area along the route where cars could idle without immediate notice. Gas stations and Dollar General became landmarks of suspicion, places with cameras that may or may not have been checked, places with parking lots large enough to hide a transaction in plain sight. The public, piecing together scraps of geography, created a mental map of opportunity. Investigators know that geography is not just physical, but digital. Cell phone tower pings could place Don, Candace, or anyone else on that corridor in specific windows of time. Vehicle GPS logs, even if deleted, might reveal routes traveled. Surveillance footage from small businesses, if preserved, could fill gaps. But in a case where evidence collection appeared fractured from the start, those sources may never have been fully tapped. Without them, speculation fills the void. What makes this corridor theory powerful is its ordinariness. Moving a child along the same road a father drives to work every day blends the suspicious with the mundane. If a neighbor glimpsed Dunn's truck heading toward Fall Branch, what would they think? Nothing unusual, it was his commute. If cameras caught his vehicle at a gas station, it would not stand out, men stop for fuel daily. This camouflage of routine is what investigators fear most. When crime hides inside habit, of course, the counter-argument is strong. This is not an empty road. Fall Branch is not a ghost town. Gas stations, restaurants, and highway ramps are frequented by locals and travelers alike. Many of these businesses have security systems, even if outdated. To orchestrate a transfer or disposal without being seen, without leaving a trace, requires not only opportunity but luck, the absence of watchful eyes, the coincidence of dead cameras, the silence of bystanders. It is possible, but it is not easy. To move beyond theory, investigators would need to reconstruct that drive in forensic detail. Step 1. Gather every CCTV clip from businesses along the corridor for the crucial time window. Even if recordings are overwritten, subpoenas might recover backup data. Step 2. Analyze cell tower records for pings that place family phones, or anyone linked to the case, along that route at specific hours. Step 3. Interview clerks, cashiers, and regulars, people who may not have realized at the time that something unusual brushed past them. Did anyone see a hurried stop? A child in a car who should not have been there? A handoff in a parking lot? Forensic cartographers would then mark zones of invisibility. Those places where cameras do not cover, where line of sight is blocked, where a car could stop for 60 seconds unseen. It is those blind spots, not the well-lit stations, that are most likely to hide answers. Mapping them against the time it takes to drive from Ben Hill to Fall Branch creates a framework. Could the timeline of Summer's disappearance align with a hidden stop along the way? The corridor theory also raises broader investigative questions. If Don or anyone else regularly traveled this route, then any suspicious stop would only be noticed if paired with unusual behavior. Did his commute that day take longer than normal? Did receipts show a purchase inconsistent with his routine? Was there a food stop or fuel purchase he could not account for? These are the subtle inconsistencies that, when cross-checked with geography, can expose deception. And yet, until those questions are answered, the corridor remains more myth than map. People imagine dark exchanges at Dollar General, hidden transfers on Lemongrass Drive, unrecorded moments at Pizza Plus. Without verified surveillance or logs, the narrative is driven by what could have happened rather than what did. Still, geography matters in every case. The land itself records silence. Roads connect opportunity. The corridor from Ben Hill through Fall Branch toward Jonesboro is not just a commute. It is a stretch of road heavy with suspicion, where routine may have cloaked crime. Whether Summer Wells ever traveled that route in those fateful hours remains unproven. But for those who study the case, that line on the map is not just asphalt. It is a corridor of opportunity, a dangerous stretch where innocence and guilt blur, and where the truth may still be waiting, hidden in the blind spots between cameras. Three days after Summer Wells vanished, a burial took place at Morrison Cemetery. To the grieving family who lowered their loved one into the earth, it was a day of mourning. To online sleuths combing every coincidence, it was something else, the possible stage for one of the oldest concealment tricks in organized crime, the double burial. The logic is chilling in its simplicity. A grave is dug deep enough to hold a casket. Before the body arrives, another body is placed at the bottom. Soil covers it, then the legitimate burial takes place on top. The headstone that follows tells the story of the person everyone knew had died. Beneath, hidden from record and ritual, lies someone who was never supposed to be there. For an investigator, it is the perfect camouflage. What could be less suspicious than a fresh grave in a cemetery? In true crime lore, the double burial appears in mafia testimonies and gangland confessions. It requires access, timing, and silence. The process begins with the grave digger. Whether employed by the cemetery or contracted privately, the digger knows how deep to cut. To create space for a hidden body, the hole is dug deeper than usual. The illicit body is placed, sometimes without a coffin, often wrapped in plastic or cloth. Soil is shoveled back. Then the grave waits until the legitimate casket arrives. Once lowered, it seals the crime below, protected by ritual, mourners, and the permanence of stone. The telltale signs are subtle but real. Soil that has been disturbed twice often shows layering inconsistencies. The bottom strata may not compact evenly, leading to future sinking or uneven settling. In forensic geology, investigators look for signs of subsidence, ground that sinks more than expected months after burial. Ground-penetrating radar can also reveal anomalies, too dense objects stacked, voids between soil layers, irregular reflections in what should be a single casket outline. To the naked eye, a grave looks ordinary. To the right equipment, the earth can confess. That is why the burial at Morrison drew so much suspicion. The timing, June 18, 2021, just 3 days after Summer disappeared, seemed too sharp. Too close. Commenters on forums flagged it immediately. Timothy Morrison's burial was right after Summer vanished. I just wish someone in law enforcement would get to the bottom of this. Another asked bluntly, why has that grave never been checked? The coincidence of dates created a hypothesis. What if Summer had been hidden beneath another's final rest, her absence disguised by another family's grief? For a criminal, it is the ultimate insurance policy. Once a grave is filled, it is protected by law, by religion, by custom. Disturbing it requires court orders, paperwork, and emotional permission from families already mourning. It is expensive, controversial, and politically fraught. The very hurdles that make exhumation rare are what make the theory appealing to those who imagine cover-ups. If you want to hide something where no one will ever look, you hide it in a place people refuse to touch. The counter-argument, of course, is straightforward. Cemeteries keep detailed records: who died, when, where they were buried, who paid for the plot. Vault companies document installations. Funeral homes oversee logistics. To insert another body secretly would require more than a grave digger. It would require collusion among multiple parties, or a digger willing to risk everything for silence. In a small town, such a conspiracy would be hard to keep. And if discovered, the consequences would be catastrophic: loss of license, prison sentences, lawsuits. That reality tempers the theory, at least for skeptics. Still, the questions linger. Who ordered the grave dug that week? Who was present? Was the hole deeper than standard? Were there discrepancies in soil settling afterward? These are factual questions, but without public answers, they remain speculative shadows. An interviewer confronting cemetery staff would have to press with uncomfortable questions. Who instructed you to dig that grave? Did anyone approach you with money? Did you notice anything strange about the soil or the depth? Has anyone ever asked you not to talk about it? In true crime investigations, silence is rarely neutral. It either conceals trauma or it conceals guilt. Whether fact or folklore, the Morrison double burial theory has become one of the case's most durable rumors. It embodies the fear that Summer was not only killed, but buried beneath another's memory, locked in a vault of earth that no one would dare disturb. Skeptics call it impossible. Believers call it inevitable. What cannot be denied is the timing: 3 days, 1 grave, 1 missing child. Until the records are examined, until the soil is scanned, Morrison Cemetery remains a stage for speculation. And in the silence of its rows, beneath the flowers and marble, may lie either nothing more than bones where they are meant to be, or the darkest secret of all, sealed by ritual, hidden by faith, waiting for the day someone dares to dig. In almost every true crime investigation, one theory resurfaces with grim regularity: the possibility that a body was entombed in concrete. It is an idea rooted in both history and practicality. Concrete is everywhere, in foundations, driveways, basements, chimneys. Once poured, it hardens into a fortress, sealing whatever lies beneath. For criminals, it is the closest thing to permanence. For investigators, it is one of the most difficult scenarios to prove without tearing apart entire structures. The suspicion in Summer Wells' case grew from Don's trade. By profession, he worked in construction, moving from site to site, often pouring new foundations or repairing old ones. In community discussions, commenters made the connection almost instantly. Cement-covered decomp smell. One person speculated, imagining how the stench of a decaying body could be masked under a fresh slab. The theory spread quickly: if Don had access to cement, tools, and construction sites, he might have had both the means and the opportunity to make Summer disappear forever. Why concrete? First, it masks odor. Cadaver dogs can detect decomposition through soil and water, but a thick slab of poured cement can suppress scent trails long enough to throw off even trained animals. Second, it is visually unremarkable. A new patch of dirt in the woods attracts suspicion. A freshly poured walkway at a job site does not. Third, it is inaccessible without destruction. To check beneath concrete requires breaking it apart, jackhammers and saws cutting through the hardened shell, an invasive and expensive process few investigators pursue without strong cause. Other parts of construction provide similar concealment. Fireplaces, for instance. In older homes or new builds, a chimney cavity or sealed hearth can become an unexpected hiding place. Once bricked over or mortared shut, the hollow behind is invisible to the eye. Even crawl spaces and wall cavities can serve the same role. A missing child, hidden in a place no one thinks to open, could stay concealed for decades. Detecting such concealment requires careful forensic inspection. Investigators look for differences in texture or color, patches of cement that appear newer, smoother, or of a slightly different shade. They trace purchase records, unusual amounts of cement or mortar bought during a suspicious time window. Ground-penetrating radar can scan beneath slabs, revealing anomalies in density or voids where human remains might disrupt uniform layers. Even thermal imaging has been used in some cases, detecting differences in how heat radiates from newer concrete versus older structures. Real cases give weight to the theory. John Wayne Gacy, one of America's most infamous serial killers, buried multiple victims in the crawl space of his home, later pouring concrete to cover the graves. In Mexico, cartel safe houses have been found with bodies sealed into walls, their remains discovered only when renovations exposed bones. In Cleveland, the house of Ariel Castro revealed concealed chambers, where victims were hidden for years. Though not all involved cement, each case proved the same principle: buildings can hide horrors as easily as they hide plumbing or wiring. Applying that lens to Summer Wells' disappearance, the theory hinges on Don's access. He worked on active job sites. He had tools, trucks, and knowledge of concrete. A small body could, in theory, be hidden during a pour, entombed beneath a slab before the cement hardened. Or, closer to home, repairs on the Wells property could have provided a cover. The basement, the outbuildings, even the porch have been scrutinized in online discussions as potential sites where a quick pour could mask a terrible secret. Skeptics argue that the plan would be riskier than it appears. Pouring concrete is not a solo act. Most job sites involve multiple workers, supervisors, and delivery receipts for materials. For a body to vanish into cement, it would require not only opportunity, but also silence from anyone else present. A concrete mixer does not appear at a house without a record of order and delivery. A pour large enough to cover a body would raise costs, require coordination, and leave behind paperwork. And unlike burying in woods, which can be done alone in secrecy, concrete concealment often unfolds in plain sight of co-workers. Still, the possibility cannot be dismissed. Investigators would need to follow a paper trail. First, review Don's work logs, which job sites he was assigned to in June 2021, especially in the days after Summer vanished. Second, cross-check receipts from cement suppliers. Were unusual orders placed, deliveries recorded, or jobs rushed? Third, speak to coworkers. Did anyone notice hurried pours, late-night work, or tasks completed outside normal schedules? Fourth, scan suspect locations with GPR, looking for anomalies under slabs, patios, or fireplaces linked to his work. An interviewer facing Don directly would have to press with precise questions. What construction jobs were you working on that week? Who was with you when cement was poured? Did you buy any bags of mix privately? Did you ever repair or close up fireplaces, walls, or crawl spaces during that period? These are not casual questions. They are meant to pin opportunity to verifiable facts. The concrete theory, like many in this case, balances between plausibility and paranoia. On one side, it fits: a construction worker father, access to materials, a method proven in other crimes. On the other, it demands risk, collusion, and luck, factors that complicate its execution. Without records, without scans, it remains speculation. Yet the speculation persists because it terrifies. If Summer is entombed in stone, then no search party with dogs or drones will ever find her. She will remain where she was hidden, a secret hardened by time, waiting only for a hammer to break it open. Until receipts are checked, until job sites are scanned, the theory cannot be confirmed or dismissed. Concrete keeps its secrets well. And that is why, for many who follow the case, the thought that Summer might lie beneath it is the darkest possibility of all. Not lost in the woods, not spirited away, but sealed forever in the very material meant to build safe homes. Every missing person case lives at the intersection of two forces: the private world of family and the public world of community. In the disappearance of Summer Wells, that intersection is not just a quiet overlap, but a tangled net of relationships that has sparked some of the most unsettling theories. If Summer did not vanish into woods or concrete, perhaps she was pulled into a network, protected, hidden, traded, by people who stood much closer than strangers in the night. The center of that network, according to many locals, is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In rural Tennessee, the church is more than a place of worship. It is a hub, a social square, the thread connecting families, volunteers, and community figures. Through it, the Wells family knew people like Robin Lane, a church member who became a visible presence after Summer's disappearance. Others like Jackie Dodson and neighbors tied into the orbit were drawn into speculation, not always because of evidence, but because of proximity. A church that once symbolized sanctuary became, in the eyes of some, the foundation of suspicion. If a child needed to be hidden, where better than among familiar faces, protected by the social shield of shared faith? But church ties were only one strand. Another, darker strand was money. Don Wells was not a man of wealth. He worked construction, paid bills, lived in a home cluttered and half-finished. Rumors swirled that he carried debts, whether financial, personal, or criminal. Commenters drew a grim logic from this. If you owe and cannot pay, you may be forced to trade what you do have. In this case, that trade could have been flesh and blood. They gave her up to pay a debt. Some whispered, pointing not to an accident covered up, but to a transaction arranged. The mechanics of such an exchange are horrific but plausible in theory. A child can be moved in minutes, driven down rural roads, taken across county lines. A network of safe houses, trailers, motels, properties owned by friends or associates can shield the handoff. Once integrated into a trafficking route, a child can vanish into neighboring states, funneled through corridors like I-81, which stretches from Tennessee up the eastern seaboard, a known artery for both commerce and crime. Signs of trafficking are subtle but traceable: sudden inflows of money, unexplained travel, individuals making trips at odd hours, contacts with people far outside the local community. In some accounts, the state of Kansas appeared as a destination, with stories of a red house guarded by armed men. Were these fantasies or fragments of real sightings? Without verification, they remain in the gray fog where rumor and reality blur. Yet to those convinced of trafficking, they are markers on a hidden map. What would investigators need to look for? Bank records showing large or unusual transactions around the time of Summer's disappearance. Vehicle registrations or rental agreements tied to sudden trips. Travel logs, motel check-ins, or toll records that place suspects far from home. Communications, texts, calls, encrypted apps that spiked before and after June 15, 2021. These are not the tools of folklore. They are the backbone of trafficking investigations worldwide. And yet, for every claim, a counterweight exists. There is no confirmed evidence that Dawn owed debts large enough to trigger such a drastic repayment. There is no documented link between the Wells family and organized trafficking groups. Naming church members or neighbors without proof risks not only defamation but destruction of lives built on nothing more than gossip. The line between possibility and accusation is razor thin, and true crime communities often skate dangerously close to it. Skeptics argue that these theories say more about our fear of hidden networks than about the facts of the case itself. Still, the suspicion persists because it fills the gaps that evidence has left open. When no body is found, when searches fail, when timelines shift, people look to systems larger than coincidence. A lone predator could take a child, yes, but a network could make her disappear without a trace. It is this idea, that Summer was absorbed into a protective web of people who either owed favors or demanded payment, that chills even hardened investigators. Imagine the questions an interviewer might put to those on the periphery. Who contacted you the night Summer disappeared? Did anyone travel unexpectedly? Did anyone receive money around that time? Do you know of properties used as temporary shelters? Were you ever asked to look the other way? Each question pushes against the silence of community ties, the unspoken agreements that can conceal as much as they comfort. The danger of this theory lies not only in its implications, but in its plausibility. Trafficking is not a myth, it is a global crisis. Children disappear into its folds every year, many never resurfacing. Tennessee itself has documented cases, particularly along interstate corridors. To dismiss the possibility outright would be irresponsible. To assert it as fact without proof would be reckless. And so the theory hovers, suspended, both terrifying and unconfirmed. What is certain is that if Summer was taken into such a network, finding her would require more than dogs in the woods or drones above the hauler. It would require forensic accounting, digital surveillance, interstate cooperation, and the willingness to tear open the very social fabric of the community that raised her. That task is daunting. It may also be the only way to test whether the protective network theory is fantasy or the hidden truth of what happened on Ben Hill Road. In a case starved of hard evidence, even the smallest fragments take on oversized weight. For the disappearance of Summer Wells, 4 details in particular have been picked apart endlessly by the public. A mysterious Toyota Tacoma, whispers of dray drowning. After a day at the swimming hole, a truck that looked suspiciously like one driven by Detective Pruitt. And finally, the dreams of strangers who claimed visions of where Summer might be. None of these fragments are conclusive. Each is debated, contradicted, doubted. But together they form the kind of college that defines unsolved cases, scraps of possibility, waiting for proof. The Tacoma came first. Early in the investigation, law enforcement asked for information about a maroon or red 1998 to 2000 Toyota Tacoma with a ladder rack and a white bucket in the bed. It was reportedly seen in the area on the afternoon Summer vanished. For sleuths, it became the quintessential clue, a vehicle, specific in color and model, identifiable in a region where every farmer and laborer drives a truck. If investigators issued a bulletin, it meant someone saw it. But who was behind the wheel? Was it a neighbor, a contractor, or something darker, an abductor scouting the hauler. Online discussions latched onto the image, reconstructing the truck, circling photographs of similar vehicles, demanding to know why no suspect was ever publicly tied to it. The Tacoma remains one of the most enduring mysteries, either the most important lead never solved, or a dead end inflated by lack of answers. Then came the theory of dry drowning. On the day she disappeared, Summer reportedly spent time at a swimming hole. Dry drowning, a rare but real condition, occurs when water inhaled into the lungs triggers swelling or blockage hours after swimming, leading to sudden collapse. Some community voices suggested that Summer may have suffered such a fate later that evening, collapsing at home, leading to panic and concealment. The theory fits certain accident cover-up narratives. There is no abductor, no elaborate conspiracy, only a tragic accident misunderstood as foul play. Yet medical experts caution that dry drowning is extremely rare, and symptoms would likely have shown earlier. Without medical records or eyewitness accounts of distress, the theory remains speculative. Still, it lingers because it provides a simple explanation, one that doesn't require strangers or networks, only a moment of oversight at the water's edge. The third fragment belongs to law enforcement itself. A witness claimed to see a vehicle resembling that of Detective Pruitt along the very route Don Wells drove to work, near Fall Branch. Was it coincidence? A routine patrol? Or was Pruitt himself monitoring the corridor, suspecting that something or someone was being moved that way? For the public, it raised unsettling questions. If investigators were watching that road, what did they know, and why was nothing ever revealed? For skeptics, it was nothing more than a mistaken sighting. After all, how many white unmarked vehicles patrol rural Tennessee on any given night? Without dashcam logs or placement records, the claim remains unverified. Yet its power lies in its implication. Maybe law enforcement saw more than they admitted. Maybe the blind spots weren't blind at all. And then there are the dreams. In forum posts and comment threads, strangers claimed visions. A trailer burning, a marker in Utah, a child's body hidden in a place overlooked by searchers. One dreamer described Summer near a well, another near a red building, another saw fire consuming the place she lay. In any formal investigation, dreams are inadmissible, dismissed as noise. But in the crowdsourced investigation of the internet, they become folklore, data points for those who want meaning in chaos. Were these dreams random, or subconscious interpretations of details already circulating online? Most likely the latter. But they illustrate the desperation of the community. When physical evidence is absent, even visions become clues. Assessing these fragments requires more than belief, it requires verification. For the Tacoma, investigators would need to review CCTV from local gas stations and traffic cams on June 15, 2021, check registration databases for matching trucks, and interview anyone who owned a similar model. For dry drowning, medical records from the day, emergency calls, doctor visits, symptoms observed would be critical. For the Pruitt vehicle, cell tower pings and GPS logs from law enforcement vehicles could confirm presence. For the dreams, the task is simpler. Categorize them as folklore, not fact, unless cross-referenced with verifiable evidence. The counterarguments are strong. Witness memories are unreliable, especially when filtered through fear. Vehicles are misidentified constantly. Dry drowning, though possible, is unlikely without symptoms. Law enforcement vehicles are common. Seeing one proves nothing. Dreams, however vivid, are not evidence. Each fragment alone collapses under scrutiny, but together they continue to haunt the narrative. Ultimately, these scattered details reflect the broader challenge of the Summer Wells case. With so little concrete evidence, the public has built castles out of crumbs, a truck, a theory of water, a vehicle sighting, a dream. Investigators must sift carefully, separating what is possible from what is probable, what is probable from what is provable. And until that separation is made, these fragments will continue to circulate, filling silence with suspicion, and giving a grieving community stories to cling to, even if they never lead to the truth. In the chaos of rumor and speculation, the difference between theory and evidence is action. If Summerwell's case is ever to move beyond whispers, investigators, official or independent, must build a roadmap, a structured path that prioritizes what can be proven over what can only be imagined. Every lead, every suspicion, must be tested against reality. The question is not simply what might have happened, but how to verify it. The first priority is the urn necklaces. Online, they have fueled some of the most visceral theories. Yet their mystery could be resolved quickly with proper examination. The second priority lies in the cremation angle. Not the rumors, not the speculation, but the records. Crematoriums maintain detailed logs, dates, times, operators, cycle temperatures, chain of custody forms. These logs, paired with bills of lading and transfer receipts, could reveal whether any undocumented operation occurred in the critical window. Subpoenaing those records, along with interviewing staff on duty, would provide clarity. Did every cremation that week correspond to a certified death certificate? Were any anomalies reported? Even a single mismatch between paperwork and reality would justify deeper investigation. The third tier of the roadmap focuses on geography, the corridor from Ben Hill Road through Fall Branch toward Jonesboro. Business surveillance cameras, even outdated, often overwrite every 24 to 72 hours. Some, however, archive to cloud servers or backups. Subpoenas to gas stations, restaurants, and small shops could yield footage long forgotten. Pair that with cell tower ping data from family phones or vehicles, and investigators could reconstruct movements in the critical hours. Mapping those pings against known blind spots would either strengthen or weaken the theory of a roadside transfer. This is mid-level difficulty, not as simple as analyzing jewelry, but more attainable than tearing apart structures or graves. Fourth comes the Morrison Cemetery suspicion. Before rumors spiral further, the ground itself can answer. Non-invasive ground-penetrating radar surveys could be conducted discreetly, scanning for anomalies beneath suspect graves. If scans reveal double layering or unexplained voids, only then would authorities need to consider the sensitive and costly step of exhumation. To reach that stage requires a threshold, a convergence of evidence strong enough to convince a judge and to respect the grieving families already laid to rest. GPR provides that middle ground, evidence without desecration. The fifth and most invasive step involves construction sites linked to Don Wells. Reviewing work logs and cement purchase records is straightforward, but confirming whether concrete concealment occurred may require destructive testing, breaking slabs, drilling walls, scanning chimneys. Such action demands overwhelming cause. It is the kind of measure that only becomes justifiable once easier evidence has been exhausted. Until then, those theories remain in suspension, waiting for corroboration. Threaded through these steps must be a careful strategy of law and public relations. Accusations without proof can destroy innocent lives. Investigators must resist the temptation of trial by media. Instead, journalists can serve as pressure points, filing open records requests, spotlighting unanswered questions, and keeping the story alive without crossing into defamation. The balance is delicate. Press hard enough to expose negligence, but not so hard that the investigation collapses under claims of bias. The ultimate benchmark is sufficiency. What constitutes enough to move from suspicion to legal action? In the American system, probable cause must be supported by tangible facts. A mismatched cremation log, ashes in a necklace, a verified timeline gap, any of these could open the door. What is not enough are rumors, coincidences, or internet theories alone. The roadmap exists to separate what can be subpoenaed from what can only be speculated. For those watching at home, the visual of this plan would be striking. A checklist pinned to a corkboard, boxes labeled photos, cremation logs, CCTV, GPR, work records. As each is ticked off, the sense of momentum grows, only to halt at the hardest steps, the ones that demand court orders or physical disruption. A voiceover could drive the message home. Every theory remains just that until it passes the threshold of evidence. And so the call to action is simple but weighty. If you hold something tangible, a photograph with metadata intact, a receipt, a memory tied to a date and place, preserve it. Do not edit, do not alter, do not bury. Evidence dies when neglected, it lives when preserved. Reach out to investigators. Keep the chain of custody intact, because at the end of this roadmap lies not just speculation, but the possibility of closure. If even one of these steps reveals truth, it could transform rumor into record, suspicion into charge, disappearance into answer. And until those steps are taken, the haunting question remains: is the truth of what happened to Summer Wells locked not in the woods or the hauler, but in the evidence we already have, waiting to be tested?